There are moments in life when something deep begins to stir within you, a quiet but undeniable movement, like the shifting of unseen roots beneath the soil. Carl Jung often wrote about these silent transformations, the times when the psyche prepares for a new stage of growth, even before the conscious mind fully understands what is happening. To Jung, the most powerful changes never come as loud announcements. They arrive in whispers, in subtle cracks within the old way of living, and through those cracks a new self begins to emerge. One of the most telling signs that you are approaching the best stage of your life is a strange feeling of disconnection from what once felt stable. The places, habits, and even the people that used to feel like home may start to seem distant, almost as if they belonged to another version of you. Jung called this a necessary tension, the clash between who you once were and the person waiting to be born. It is not a loss but a preparation, like the silence that comes before the first notes of a symphony. In this period, confusion often takes center stage. You may feel as though you are wandering in the dark, unable to clearly see where you are headed. Yet Jung taught that such disorientation is not a failure of vision, it is the very evidence that your inner world is reorganizing itself. To stand at the threshold of a new life often feels like being stripped bare, old certainties crumble, but what rises in their place is a deeper authenticity that was always hidden beneath the surface. The ego, that fragile mask we all wear, begins to loosen its grip during such times. You may notice a growing impatience with the roles you once performed simply to satisfy others, a refusal to keep carrying identities that no longer feel alive. Jung described this as individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are beyond the expectations of society, or even your own past. The best stage of life begins not with perfection but with honesty, with the willingness to face yourself without disguise. Another sign appears in the realm of dreams. Jung believed the unconscious speaks in symbols when the conscious mind resists change. During transitions, the imagery of dreams often becomes more vivid, more urgent, as if your deeper self is trying to guide you across the threshold. Dreams of death, of journeys, of hidden rooms or unfamiliar landscapes are not warnings of destruction, but reminders that something within is waiting to awaken. To begin the best stage of life is to allow these messages to be heard, to treat them as quiet lanterns illuminating your path forward. There is also a subtle shift in the way time itself feels. Hours spent in the old patterns may now feel heavy and suffocating, while even brief moments of authenticity can feel boundless and alive. This contrast is not accidental. Jung wrote that the psyche reveals its direction not through logic alone but through the intensity of our emotional resonance. When something new calls to you, the heart will quicken, the air will seem lighter, and a sense of inevitability will begin to form. The world outside may look the same, but inside you are already stepping into another life. This stage is rarely gentle. It demands courage, for every birth begins with struggle. Jung warned that the unconscious does not release its treasures easily. It asks for the dismantling of illusions, the surrender of old defenses, and the willingness to face what you have long avoided. Yet the very difficulty of this process is the proof that transformation is near. A comfortable life rarely leads to individuation. It is the friction, the pressure, the uncomfortable awakening that signals you are approaching something greater. And slowly, without fanfare, a new energy begins to gather. It may first appear as small sparks of clarity, fleeting moments where you suddenly see yourself and your life with unusual sharpness. You might realize that the pain you endured was not meaningless but necessary to break you open. You may sense that the losses and disconnections were not punishment but preparation. These glimpses are not yet the full arrival of the new stage, but they are signs that it has already begun to take root within you. The best stage of life, Jung would remind us, is not about external success or the applause of others. It is about alignment between the conscious and the unconscious, the outer path and the inner truth. When these begin to converge, you feel it as a kind of inner coherence, as if your life is finally speaking in one clear voice. This is why the early signs may feel disorienting. The old voices are fading, and the new one is just beginning to be heard. But once it rises, it brings with it a sense of freedom that no external force can grant or take away. This is only the beginning of the journey. What comes next is the deep unfolding, the realization of what it truly means to step into the best stage of your life. And it is to that unfolding that we will turn next. When Jung spoke of transformation, he often reminded his students that the psyche does not move in straight lines, it spirals. You return to old themes, old wounds, but each time you circle back, you are not the same person who encountered them before. To begin the best stage of your life is not to erase the past, but to carry it differently, to see in it not chains, but material for growth. What once felt like unbearable weight slowly becomes a foundation upon which something new can be built. As this unfolding deepens, solitude often arrives. Not the shallow loneliness of absence, but a deeper solitude that feels both heavy and strangely necessary. You may notice yourself pulling back from noise and distraction, not out of bitterness, but out of an instinctive need to protect the fragile beginnings of what is being born within you. Jung observed that individuation requires this inward turning, for the soul cannot fully awaken in the glare of constant distraction. The best stage of life is preceded by silence, silence that allows you to hear the faint music of your own depths. In this quiet space, forgotten desires often resurface. You might recall the passions you once abandoned in order to survive or to fit into the mold others created for you. Perhaps as a child you loved to draw, to wander in nature, to lose yourself in books or music, and now those impulses return, not as childish fantasies, but as vital clues to who you really are. Jung believed that the child within us never dies. It waits patiently, holding the key to authenticity, until we are finally ready to listen. To enter a new stage of life is to reclaim what was once silenced, and to let it live again through you. At the same time, there is a growing sensitivity to what is false. Masks become harder to wear, small talk feels exhausting, and environments that once seemed harmless now feel suffocating. This is not because you have grown weak, but because you have begun to sense the difference between what nourishes the soul and what starves it. Jung described this as the awakening of the self, the deeper center of being that does not tolerate lies or half-truths. When this awakening begins, it becomes impossible to go back. The cost of betraying yourself is too high, and the call to live authentically becomes too strong. This period can also feel like standing between two worlds. The old one is still visible, with its familiar routines and identities, but it no longer fits. The new one is only a vision, still forming, still fragile, and yet it draws you forward with irresistible force. Jung compared this stage to alchemy, where base metals are subjected to fire and pressure until they transform into gold. Your old self is not destroyed, it is transmuted, refined, and reconfigured into something closer to your essence. What feels like loss is, in truth, a purification. You may begin to notice synchronicities during this time, strange coincidences that feel too precise to be chance. A book appears in your life at exactly the moment you need it. An unexpected encounter sparks an idea that lingers for weeks. Events align in subtle ways that seem to affirm your path. Jung believed synchronicities are expressions of the unconscious aligning with the outer world, signs that your inner transformation is beginning to find harmony in the fabric of reality itself. They are reminders that the best stage of your life is not an isolated creation, but a dance between your soul and the greater order of the world. And as the spiral continues, something else begins to stir, a sense of courage that does not come from certainty, but from acceptance. You realize that perfection is not required for the journey ahead, only sincerity. You begin to understand that mistakes are not failures, but necessary steps, for the psyche grows not in straight lines but through struggle and reconciliation. Jung often wrote that wholeness is not about becoming flawless. It is about embracing the fullness of what you are, both light and shadow, and allowing life itself to be your teacher. In these moments, a new kind of hope takes root. Not the fragile hope that clings to specific outcomes, but a deeper faith that the path unfolding is meaningful, even when it is difficult. It is a hope born not of control, but of trust. And it is here, in this trust, that you begin to sense the quiet arrival of the best stage of your life. Not as a distant dream, but as something already present, waiting for you to walk fully into it. And still, the journey goes deeper. For the best stage of life is not only about inner awakening, it also reshapes how you move through the world. It changes how you love, how you work, how you see others, and how you carry your past. To see how this transformation ripples outward into every corner of your life, we must continue further. When the inner transformation begins to spill outward, the texture of daily life subtly shifts. Tasks that once felt hollow now carry a quiet sense of meaning, and even the smallest gestures begin to hold weight. Jung observed that when the self awakens, the outer world does not change in appearance, but in resonance. What was once dull can suddenly feel alive: a walk in the evening, the sound of rain, the face of a stranger passing by. The psyche, once trapped in repetition, begins to see life itself as symbolic, as layered with hidden messages. You start to live not only in the surface of events, but in their deeper rhythm. At this stage, relationships undergo a profound test. People who knew you as one version of yourself may struggle to accept the person you are becoming. Some may cling to the old roles, trying to hold you in place, while others may quietly drift away. Jung warned that individuation is not a collective journey, it is deeply personal, and often lonely. Yet in this loneliness lies the seed of truer connections, bonds not built on masks or obligations, but on authenticity. As you grow into the best stage of your life, you begin to attract people who resonate with your deeper truth, not because you seek them, but because the world mirrors back the frequency you now carry. This is also the moment when the shadow becomes unavoidable. The shadow is the part of yourself you have repressed, denied, or feared, and as you move toward authenticity, it rises to meet you. Jung believed that no true growth can happen without this confrontation. To step into the best stage of your life is to face the parts of yourself you once hid, the anger, the envy, the vulnerability, the impulses you could not admit. At first, this encounter feels threatening, even shameful. But with time, you discover that the shadow is not an enemy, but an untapped source of power. By integrating it, you become more whole, more human, more capable of navigating the world with honesty. It is in this integration that real freedom begins to emerge. You no longer live under the tyranny of appearances, constantly trying to project what others will approve of. Instead, you carry yourself with a quiet solidity, knowing that you contain both darkness and light, and that both are necessary. Jung wrote that to become whole is to carry the opposites within yourself without being torn apart. This balance is not easy, but when it begins, you sense a strength that is unshakable. A strength not built on denial, but on acceptance. Outwardly, this shift may look like simplicity. You may find yourself letting go of things that once seemed essential, possessions, ambitions, even certain identities. Yet what remains feels richer, more aligned. Jung often noted that the psyche seeks meaning more than comfort, and when you enter this stage of life, meaning becomes the measure of everything. If something no longer nourishes the soul, it falls away. What stays is what gives depth, even if it does not bring applause. And then there is a curious sense of time expanding. You begin to notice that the rush, the frantic need to chase, loses its grip. Moments unfold with more presence, as if the future no longer feels like something to be conquered, but something that will arrive when it is meant to. Jung described this as living in kairos, the right time, the inner time, where events happen not by force, but by alignment. It is in kairos that the best stage of life takes shape, not through control, but through rhythm, through being in tune with the deeper order of things. Even suffering begins to take on a new texture. Instead of seeing it as meaningless cruelty, you start to recognize its role as a teacher. Pain sharpens perception, loss deepens compassion, and limitation forces creativity. The psyche, once fractured by resistance, begins to weave suffering into the larger pattern of life. Jung would say that the wound becomes the womb, that out of the very place you were broken, something entirely new can be born. This does not make pain easier, but it makes it bearable, and even sacred. And finally, there comes a subtle but unmistakable shift in the way you relate to others. You begin to see through the masks they wear, sensing their own struggles, their hidden battles, their longing for wholeness. This vision softens judgment and awakens compassion. To live in the best stage of life is not only to see yourself clearly, but to see the humanity of others with equal clarity. You begin to carry within you a quiet tenderness, even for those who cannot understand you, even for those who oppose you. Yet this is not the end of the transformation. For once the shadow is faced and the heart grows more compassionate, the journey deepens into something even greater, the discovery of purpose, the realization that your own growth is not just for yourself, but part of something larger, something timeless. And it is into that mystery that we will step next. Purpose begins to whisper when the self has been quieted, when the masks have fallen, and when the shadow has been embraced. Jung often said that the soul does not thrive on comfort alone, it demands meaning. And as you move closer to the best stage of your life, you begin to feel this demand more urgently. You realize that your existence is not an accident of chance, but part of a greater unfolding, that your story is woven into something vast, something beyond your immediate understanding. This realization often comes not through triumphs, but through moments of stillness. A long walk at dusk, a fleeting sentence in a book, an unexpected silence in the middle of a busy day, suddenly you feel it, that quiet sense that life itself is speaking directly to you. Jung called this the voice of the self, the guiding center that is deeper than the ego, older than the individual. To hear it is to glimpse a direction that is not imposed from the outside, but rooted within the very fabric of who you are. At this stage, your choices begin to change. You no longer act simply to survive, or to be seen, or to secure the approval of others. Instead, you act because something inside you resonates with the act itself. A conversation, a project, a gesture of kindness, each becomes valuable not for its outcome, but for the truth it carries. Jung believed that meaning is discovered not in abstract ideals, but in concrete acts of living that align with the deeper self. This alignment is the hallmark of the best stage of life, a stage where action itself becomes expression of the soul. And yet, purpose is not always grand. It does not always shout or demand applause. Often it is hidden in the ordinary, in the way you care for another person, in the patience you show yourself, in the courage to keep walking even when the path is unclear. Jung reminded us that the psyche grows not in leaps of spectacle, but in the quiet accumulation of moments lived authentically. The best stage of life is not about dazzling achievements. It is about the quiet solidity of knowing that your outer life and inner truth finally move in harmony. This harmony awakens a new relationship with destiny. You begin to sense that life is not simply happening to you, nor are you merely imposing your will upon it. Instead, you move in partnership with it, responding to its invitations and challenges with an inner steadiness. Jung described this as the meeting of consciousness and fate, the dance between free will and the deeper currents that guide existence. To step into the best stage of life is to stop resisting this dance, and to begin moving with it, even when you cannot see the full choreography. Another sign of this stage is the shift in how you measure value. The ego counts in numbers and comparisons, but the soul measures in depth. You may notice that what matters most to you is no longer how much you have, but how deeply you experience what is given. A single genuine friendship may feel richer than a crowd of acquaintances. A single meaningful act may outweigh years of restless striving. Jung taught that individuation turns the soul toward essence rather than accumulation. In this stage, you begin to live by essence, and in doing so, you discover a peace that no external measure can touch. As purpose takes root, resilience follows. Life does not become easier, but your relationship to difficulty changes. Challenges no longer feel like cruel obstacles, but as necessary initiations that deepen you further. You begin to sense that every trial has its place in shaping the person you are becoming. Jung often compared the psyche's growth to the forging of metal in fire. Without the fire, the metal remains weak. Without struggle, the soul remains untested. To live in this best stage is to embrace struggle as the very process that gives your life form and integrity. And perhaps the most profound shift of all is the awakening of service. Purpose does not remain contained within the self, it begins to extend outward, to touch others, to contribute to something beyond personal satisfaction. You may feel called to guide, to create, to protect, or to heal. Not because the world demands it of you, but because it flows naturally from who you have become. Jung believed that individuation ultimately returns the individual to the collective, not as a conforming part, but as a unique voice contributing to the harmony of the whole. This stage is luminous, but it is not the end. For even as purpose unfolds, there is a deeper transformation waiting, one that integrates not only the self and the shadow, but the entirety of life and death itself. The final stage is not about beginning alone, but about transcending, about becoming part of something that stretches far beyond personal identity. And to that profound horizon, we will turn next. To Jung, the ultimate stage of life was never about reaching perfection, but about reaching wholeness. Wholeness means that the fragments of the psyche, the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the shadow, the past and the present, are gathered into a single movement of being. It is the moment when you stop fleeing from what you are, and instead stand fully in it, carrying both your wounds and your wisdom with equal reverence. This is where the best stage of life quietly matures into something timeless. At this depth, death itself begins to lose its terror. Jung often reminded us that the psyche is not bound by the limits of the body alone. It carries within it images and energies that stretch across generations, as if each life is both personal and part of something eternal. When you enter this stage, you no longer cling desperately to youth or to the illusion of permanence. Instead, you begin to see life as a rhythm, a cycle of emergence, growth, decline, and renewal. And in accepting this rhythm, you discover a peace that is larger than fear. This acceptance transforms how you live. The frantic urgency to prove yourself fades. The need to compete, to measure, to justify begins to fall away. What replaces it is presence, the ability to live in each moment with the fullness of who you are. Jung wrote that the soul seeks meaning above all else, and meaning is found not in endless striving, but in the quiet integrity of being aligned with life as it is. In this best stage, you live not in resistance, but in resonance. You begin to notice that love, too, changes its form. It no longer clings, no longer demands, no longer fears loss in the same way. Love becomes spacious, tender, and enduring, not as possession, but as recognition. You see in others their struggles, their shadows, their beauty, and you love them not for what they give you, but for what they are. Jung believed that to integrate the self is also to awaken the capacity for true love, love that is free of illusion, love that accepts the whole of another person just as you have learned to accept yourself. And perhaps most profound of all, you feel yourself connected to something greater than the individual story. You sense that your life, with all its trials and transformations, is a thread in a vast tapestry. The meaning you carry does not end with you. It ripples outward into others, into the collective psyche, into the quiet unfolding of history itself. Jung often pointed to symbols of the eternal, mandalas, archetypes, myths, because they revealed that human life, in all its fragility, participates in patterns far older than any single person. To step into the best stage of life is to recognize yourself as part of that larger pattern. And so, the signs of this stage are subtle but unmistakable. A peace that endures even in struggle. A clarity that shines through confusion. A compassion that reaches even those who cannot return it. A freedom from the endless need to become someone else, because you have finally become yourself. These are not fleeting moods, but the steady ground upon which the rest of your days may unfold. The best stage of life is not about escaping pain, nor is it about constant joy. It is about depth, coherence, and presence. It is about carrying your humanity with honesty and grace, and in doing so, touching something that feels eternal. Jung believed that each of us is called to this transformation, though not all answer the call. But if you have felt the whispers, if you have endured the disorientation, if you have embraced the shadow and followed the path inward, then you are already walking into it. And so the journey completes its spiral. What began as confusion and loss becomes clarity and wholeness. What once felt like an ending reveals itself as a beginning. And in the quiet realization that you are no longer at war with yourself, you discover the truth Jung knew so well, that the best stage of life does not lie somewhere in the future, waiting to be achieved. It is already here, unfolding within you, as you dare to live it.